So welcome everybody. I think we will get going. It is just after 1 o'clock, and it is good to see you all. I'm sure a few more people will join us as we get going. But welcome to the Main Street Reimagined session for March 7th. Today we're going to be talking about curation and curation in a Main Street. Before we get going, I'd just like to make a land acknowledgement. So Toronto, where I'm sat, is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And I should acknowledge, of course, that Ryerson University is going through a process to change their name in relation to the namesake of our school. So please stay tuned for that. This project is part of the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research. So the Institute is part of Ryerson University here within the Ted Rogers School of Business. And our mission is to facilitate and conduct research of both scholarly value and significance to the tourism and hospitality field. And really, we're just looking to do research that's of good quality, but is also of value to the industry and practitioners. And we're also keen to find our students opportunities and experience to get them connected with the industry and research in general. So the Main Street Reimagined project, if you're new to us, this is a project within the Institute for Hospitality and Tourism Research. And really this is, we're tourism people. So it's myself and Dr. Walter Jameson that you'll meet in a minute, with support from, great support from one of our grad students, Natasha, who's on this call here. And it's really about applying tourism-related ideas and philosophies to Main Streets and the BIA community. Please go to our website where you find lots of downloads, including a download for today that will be up very shortly. I think it might even be up by the time Jeff has finished talking with us. But there's lots of sessions, videos, and downloads for you to access free of charge. And during this call, I will drop the link for our newsletter so you can stay updated and follow along. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Walter. And then Walter's going to introduce our guest speaker for today and lead the discussion. So thank you, Walter, and thank you, Jeff, for your time. Looking forward to listening to you.
Thanks, Tom. Just to add a little bit, as you know, we've been publishing these chapters, these sections over a period of time. And beginning in the middle of the new year, this year, we're going to start to bring things together, and it'll actually be an ebook. So we'll be adding new pieces, amending others, and it'll all be brought together in one piece, together with presentations that have happened over the webinars. As Tom described, we've been at this now for a period of time. Tom and a group of students first did a series of interviews here in the Toronto region about BIAs and the visitor economy, and then we grew that project to go nationwide, and with the help and leadership of Natasha, our graduate, we talked to 44 people across the country about how their Main Street, their BIA, whatever it happened to be where they were, how they were dealing with visitor economy, how they saw it as being valuable to what they're doing, how to do it, and that the results of that had been published and they're available on our website. So there's a full report on our findings for those of you who are interested. And as part of that process, we were lucky enough to get to speak to Jeff Bray from the Downtown Victoria Business Association. And the first discussion we had with Jeff, the first hour we had with him, was quite wide-ranging, but it convinced us that there were some key ideas that Jeff discussed that we thought were needed more exploration, more discussion. And so we had another discussion with Jeff, and we're very happy that he spent the time with us. And there was a key idea that we heard. Well, there are actually two key ideas which we'll deal with today. The first had to do with the whole idea of curation. And that was the first time that we had heard this. and our discussions, and subsequently we never heard it again. And so Jeff very kindly agreed that he would share his ideas on how he does this. And hopefully you may see some relevance to this in terms of what you're doing. And of course, after Jeff has shared some ideas, we're more than pleased to have you ask him direct questions. And the second thing, which we'll talk a little bit about, is how Jeff works within the stakeholders in Victoria. And we found that to be, again, something that we had not heard very much of, that kind of significant stakeholder coordination. Let me just talk a little bit about Jeff. He grew up in Vancouver and spent 13 years with the British Columbia government. He's a politician, or was a politician, was the MLA from Victoria Beacon Hill. He was manager of government and regulatory affairs for Shaw and BC, and now he's executive director of the Downtown Victoria Business Association. And he's also very active in a whole series of other things, how to deal with homelessness, which we know is a major issue everywhere, and of particular relevance to many Main Street's BIAs. He's the vice chair of the Royal BC Museum Foundation and a series of other things, and very active in the BIA community in British Columbia. And as you hear, Jeff, I'm sure you're going to see the combination of the politician and the bureaucrat and the personnel responsible. So it's a really magic sort of combination of things. So Jeff and I are going to be in a little bit of a conversation, and certainly with you. But Jeff, do you want to start off by just sharing a little bit about this whole idea of curation and how that came about?
Sure. So, one of the things, I've been in this role now, and first of all, Walter and Tom, thank you very much for having me, and always happy to be involved in these types of conversations. I've been in this role now sort of for 4.5 years, and I'm continually, engaged and enthusiastic with our entrepreneurs who work downtown, who invest, who create, and so it's a really amazing kind of world, the Main Street world, the Business Improvement Association world, because by and large you're dealing with lots of small and medium-sized business operators who are just very, very energetic and wanting to do something great, both for business but for community, and so it's been a really enjoyable sort of 4.5 years. But one of the things that I noticed when I came into this role was the sort of unplanned or laissez-faire approach to how businesses pop up in the downtown, how space gets leased, how you end up with whatever businesses you have in downtown. And of course, part of it is if there's a market for whatever you're selling or providing, then you will be successful. If there isn't, then your business won't survive. But in looking at the sort of last 25, 30-year history of downtown Victoria, there was a real cycle of boom and bust. In odd ways, almost sort of like Alberta, where when things are going well, boy, they are going well. But as soon as there's any economic downturn, 2008, 2001, you all of a sudden see this mass exodus of retail businesses and professional services out of downtown. And, you can go from 4% retail vacancy rate to 13, 14% very, very quickly. And it seemed odd for a downtown that we have the provincial legislature right here. We're the seat of government in the province of British Columbia. So we have all the government offices right here downtown. We're a tourism destination, and tourism's been growing So it seemed odd to me that we would have these sorts of cycles, even though we have the kinds of core elements that many other downtowns would kill for. And what became apparent to me was that a lot of businesses that popped up were those easy, inexpensive, low-cost sorts of operations, coffee shops, nail salons. You put up a couple counters, you put up a couple of chairs and whatever, and all of a sudden you've got your business. And when you have so many of those operating, when everything's going well, they make their margins, but they're all catering to the same clientele, providing the same service. When there's any economic downturn and those clientele slow down at all of them go out of business. And so I started to look at other downtowns around North America. And one of the ones that caught my attention was Portland, Oregon. So this is Portland, not maybe in the last 2 years, but previous, their municipal government was very purposeful at actually saying, we're not just going to sort of see what happens. We're actually going to create districts. We're actually going to signal that we really want, food and beverage in this area. We want arts and culture in this area, and started to work to the point where they were literally curating, business by business to create that mix of businesses that, you don't have all of one thing. And it was very, very successful. And so I looked at a place like Victoria and said, okay, what is it that we could start to do here in Victoria to maybe create a more diverse local sub-economy here that could withstand the cycle of the normal business cycle, because it was curated in a way that we didn't have too much of any one type of sector. And the idea of having the city work with property developers when they are approving new developments was one way to look at, okay, maybe there's some tools there. In another area, maybe we can provide tax holidays of some kind to encourage perhaps less businesses that couldn't afford the top rent, but businesses that were absolutely vital to have in the downtown core. So we started to take a look at that and start to talk about how we might encourage the city to move in that direction. What we also recognized was the challenge of saying, okay, well, if you're going to actually go down that road and curate, you've actually got to know what you've got. And then you've got to know, what do you need? And that is where we're at in Victoria right now, is in the city council strategic plan, is partnering with us to do a retail strategy, to actually find out, what have you got in your downtown and what is it that people are going to want? We have thousands of recently built residential units in the downtown core. We've got about 10,000 people who now live in our downtown core. Condos, rental, in some cases, non-market housing. And there's a real desire to continue that, but also to add more families. Well, why would a family live in a downtown core? Well, it's because of work-life balance. It's because of that urban lifestyle. But you need to have all the services that they need in your downtown core, or they're not going to live here. So a retail strategy would have us look around and say, what is it that people want and need in the downtown core? What do we have? And what are we missing, and what are the gaps? And it could be, we need more restaurants. There's a lot of talk about us needing another grocery store in the downtown core. Well, maybe we do, maybe we don't. Do we have a pediatric dentist downtown? How many childcare spaces do we have in downtown? And really do that deep dive, that deep analysis as to what's in and around the core, and then start to look at partnering with property developers and property owners and property management companies and say, how do we fill in those gaps to really make sure that we have enough nail salons, but not too many, but that we also have a pediatric dentist, that we also have a grocery store, that we also have childcare spaces. And the city can then signal that those are favorable community amenities in a lot of the developments that are happening, that, quite frankly, if a developer can get something approved quicker by providing 25,000 square feet for a purpose-built childcare space and only get $25 a square foot instead of $40 a square foot, that might be worth it for him or her to do that. So the retail strategy tells you what you got and what you need, and then working with the city to start to curate the actual services and businesses that you want to see in your downtown core, in your main street, so that you have that very, very stable sub-economy that can withstand the normal ebbs and flows of the business cycle, and creates the kind of downtown that locals want to be at. And, for anybody on this call, given that this is a tourism focused, whenever we travel somewhere, what's the first thing we do is we ask where the locals go. So when you create a place where the locals want to be, that then becomes the place that visitors are going to want to visit. So that's the basic idea of curation. I would say we would not need to go to the same lengths as a place like Portland that, actually was literally dealing, because that's not really the role of the city. But I think taking a completely hands-free approach, you just end up with every new development will have a coffee shop and a nail salon in their commercial space. And I'm not sure that really serves the purposes of our locals. The other part of that is that cities, and I mean, Edmonton's done this and other Canadian cities, where they've, for lack of a better term, looked at their map of their downtown core and kind of drew a line around this. And Edmonton said, this will be the ICE district. This is Chinatown. And you start to create that, and it may just be a name on a map, but you signal that this is kind of where the city wants you to go, and businesses will find their way, and you start to populate your areas in those fashions. Victoria has just approved last year an area that is was heavily industrialized, is to some extent barren with a bit of light industrial, that is ripe for some form of redevelopment right on the edge of our downtown. And they've decided that it is going to be the Arts and Innovation District. And so they're signaling very clearly that, as we redevelop, this will be the focus. There's already a project that's been proposed, and the developer it's a mixed use development. But what they're prepared to do is provide a brand new space for the Greater Victoria Art Gallery, which currently is in a facility that's off the beaten track in a residential area, not easily accessible, but recognizing this is where the city wants to go, prepared to create the space for a new home. And that's where you can start to really create the incentives for people to then all of a sudden you have an arts and innovation hub. The other part of that is Victoria has recognized that our proximity to the ocean, our working harbor, that the blue economy is an area of opportunity for Victoria, and a way to draw in new types of businesses, new types of research. And again, you create another sub-economy there. Well, what happens is then you bring new people to the region and the services that they're going to need in that area to support them, whether, again, it's restaurants, coffee shops, office space. So the idea of curation is really to have a vision and then assist property owners, managers, and businesses to sort of make that a reality. And I think for main streets that have seen the change in retail, maybe have large malls that are struggling to be full, that this idea can really help create, full occupancy on the storefront and the street side, but also a more resilient sub-economy in your sort of urban center, your commercial business district. And, certainly, my conversations with the city is recognizing that there may be ways for Victoria to do it in a Victoria fashion, similar to places like, I say, Portland, Edmonton, and others that have started to move down this path. And I think given that we are still a major tourism center, we are still the seat of government, and the provincial government is still a major employer. We have two universities here in Victoria, two major hospitals. So we have a lot of that infrastructure. But the number one sector now in Victoria is actually tech. It's quiet. You don't see it. But it's actually the number one sector right now. And so to continue to diversify the retail offering, I think, is really a way for us to make sure that those business operators can be successful, whether we're, in 2018 when everything's double-digit growth, or 2008 when everything crashes. So that's my general sense on curation, Walter.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. I think it's fair to say that certainly historically, the mall on the edge of town has been your competitor, largely to more traditional main streets. And in good times, mall operators do exactly as you were suggesting, I think, Jeff, right? They try to make sure there's a mix of things in their mall that will appeal to the visitor, to the retail segment that they think is out there. So it's not a new idea. But it's certainly a new idea as we're trying to think about how we deal with our main streets. Um, Please, anyone who has a question or a comment, just use the function and raise your hand, and we'll certainly do it. So don't. We're not going to wait till the end. If you want to question Jeff or interject something in terms of your own experience, please do that.
Actually, we have a question in the chat. Can I read it out? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
This is from Angela. How long is Victoria's retail strategy curation plan in the vision? I guess that maybe the question is like, what's the duration of the plan and what's the...
Sure. The retail strategy was adopted 3 years ago. And of course, we had COVID and various things that sort of impacted it. They have completed with a consultant some smaller retail strategies for for the city's smaller retail areas. And it was also part of a sort of, supporting neighborhoods. So the next one, and, I'm hoping they will do it now, is for downtown. One of our major property management firms does Colliers, which is, of course, a big national. They do a whole bunch of analyses on commercial office space, retail, and they do it for centers right across Canada. Our retail vacancy rate at the end of Q4 was 7%. And that's with additional capacity that's been built through development. So, we've fared comparatively well in terms of the impacts of COVID. We did not have the same lockdowns that some provinces like Ontario had, where businesses actually were shuttered. We had very little of that here. Primarily it was gyms, dance studios, but most restaurants were either in dining or certainly takeout. But I think as we see the development that's on the books over the next number of years, and we see the growth of new economic opportunities, it's more important than ever to make sure that we have that right mix to serve both visitors and locals, so that we're not going after the fact to try to say, well, geez, now we've got another 6 nail salons. Nothing wrong with nail salons, but we've got another 6 nail salons. We still don't have a dental clinic, or we still desperately need childcare spaces. So I'm hoping that the city will move on the downtown portion of that retail strategy, and recognize that it's a little bit different than a neighborhood retail strategy approach, because you really are serving a different audience in your commercial business district. You've got tourists, you've got residents, you've got office workers and others that work downtown. It's a different mix of people that you have to make sure that you're providing services for all of them.
Great, thanks. Tom, do you want to deal with the next
Sure.
question from Melanie?
Yeah, absolutely. So Melanie is asking, can you speak to signaling versus incentivizing? Has there been success with signaling without incentivizing?
Yes, I think we're starting to see that. And the example I gave of the Arts and Innovation District, where the city had said basically, they literally drew a line around an aerial map of the city and said, we're designated this as the Arts and Innovation Hub. We've seen the first development already come forward with this major community amenity, which is a new space for the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. And I can tell you, because the Art Gallery was in my writing when I was an MLA way, way, way back in a galaxy far, far away, that a new home for that art gallery has been on the books for 40 plus years. Like literally from the day it was opened, they've realized they need to be downtown. This is the type of incentive, because the city said, this is what we really want. And so a developer says, well, if I'm really providing kind of their vision, that should actually make it easier for me to get my project approved. And gosh, if this is going to be this whole area, it's going to be great for my potential tenants. or buyers who want to live in an area that's going to be about arts and innovation. So I think that's a key example of how that can work. The other is going to be zoning. And the issue is our zoning doesn't make it easy yet for makers to be retailers. So, I think the city needs to do a review to actually say, how cool would it be that I can go to the store and buy this coffee thermos, but I can also go to the side window and watch them in the back make the coffee thermos. We don't have zoning that really allows for that. You either have light industrial or you have, commercial business. And so if you zone in a way that allows for that, innovation, that kind of maker seller, you can also create, that kind of interesting mix, which for places like if anyone's been to Granville Island in Vancouver, that was back in the 70s. The model was actually to have an area that was as much for the makers as it was for the sellers. And so zoning is another way to really entice that by actually creating the space that people can then move into. But I do think the city has the opportunity to look at other incentives, such as things like tax holidays and others, to recognize that if you just leave a space to be leased out at the best and highest rate, you may not get the mix you want. If you're prepared to recognize there's an economic cost to a property owner and in some way mitigate that, especially local property owners who maybe are more invested in the community, would answer that call and say, okay, we'll do purpose-built childcare space. We'll never make the same amount of money, but we'll recoup some of it through a tax holiday and we're providing a good community benefit. And again, depending on the development, it may also be good for the people who I'm selling to, who are young families.
Jeff, that's really, really important. One of the things that we are hearing is the difficulty that you've identified, which is the zoning approval process. And so one way of incentivizing is that you've identified is really to say to prospective retail or other operations on Main Street that because of the overall goal of doing something, it's going to be easier to get your permits. Or we're going to look at relaxations. If you don't meet the parking requirement exactly the same way, we'll work with you to look at some other way of ensuring that there's sufficient parking. So that's a really important thing that I think you're saying, is that your city government, town government, whatever it happens to be, has to be on board and helping to make that happen.
Well, and of course, if that vision is endorsed at the council table, that permeates down into the frontline staff who are actually charged with delivering.
Right.
And, as anyone would know, that, for most municipalities is the professional staff just need to know what success looks like from their council. Just if I know what success looks like, I can deliver it. But if I don't know what my council is actually wanting, then it puts me in a very risk-averse position to bring anything forward because I don't know if I'm going to get my hand slapped. So, the way Edmonton approached it, this new approach that Victoria is taking makes it very clear for staff handling those applications that this is answering their vision, and I can frame it as being within their vision or approaching their vision, or this is completely opposite to where council wants to go, and I can tell the prospective developer is probably not going to be successful. Makes it work better. Most developers just say, give me an answer quick. Even if the answer is no, just give it to me quickly. So it does really help the process at the staff level if they know clearly what the council's vision is.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Tom, do you want to go to another comment? This one from Heart of Orlean.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm forgetting, I don't know your name, but the Heart of Orlean, forgive me my Anglophile pronunciation there. But so a community just outside of Ottawa, and they've done really well over COVID because of government workers actually staying home rather than going downtown. But basically, Tanis is asking, in addition to working with the city and property owners, do you have any quick and dirty suggestions a BIA can do to attract retail?
Wow. Well, that's the million dollar questions for BIAs, Tanis. And I guess the challenge is it depends on where you're at. Again, we're at 7% retail vacancy rate, so we're not in the position where we have half a city block with boarded up windows and for lease. The challenge in the Canadian context with BIAs is that we are business-led nonprofits, and we have limited financial resources, and we really don't have the ability to be entrepreneurial in the same way as our counterparts in the US often do, where they are essentially private entities, and can be much more entrepreneurial. In fact, many of them will take over buildings and lease them out themselves. But what I would say is if you are in a downtown Main Street and you have significant vacancies, and I've had conversations with a few of our property management companies who've had long held properties that are vacant and clearly no intent by the owner to really do anything, to see if there are ways to spur anything to sort of happen. But short of that, there isn't a lot the BIAs, unfortunately, Tanis, can do that are sort of cheap and cheerful to actually get spaces leased. The only suggestion for enlivening the streets is if your property management company is amenable to pop-ups of various types. So art installations, pop-up retail, those types of things where if people are prepared to cover the insurance costs, that you can activate the spaces so it looks busier, looks more active. We have a few, actually just down the street, there's a First Nations art collective that's operating out of a vacant spot as essentially a pop-up. But otherwise, BIAs, unfortunately, are really sort of limited. And cities are typically averse to pushing property owners too much. What's interesting, and I don't know about Ontario, but our BC Assessment Act here in BC, one of the premises is when the assessors for property assessment are out and about, they look at a property as and they assess it under best and highest use. So what they will do is they will say, well, geez, this is an area where your 2-story commercial building could be a 12-story condo with commercial space on the ground floor. So we're going to assess you as if that's what you are. And it essentially drives property owners ultimately to redevelop their properties because they're getting taxed as if they've already got it. And of course, the only place you can recoup that cost is your poor little candy shop on the main floor of your commercial building. But BIAs, we are somewhat limited in how we can actually deal with, significant vacancies. And we have very few tools at our disposal to actually go to a property owner and say, hey, if I do this, will you lease it out? I wish there was more.
Good. Thanks, Jeff. That's really useful. I've noted that, Angela, you've talking about data, which we think is absolutely essential. But I wonder if, just so that we don't lose this, Jeff, we can talk a little bit about how you work with the mayor and others. And then Angela will come back to your point, which is a really important one. But one of the things that we were hearing when we were talking to Jeff is this sort of unique relationship he has with various stakeholders.
Sure. Well, when I came into this role, what was sort of interesting is our mayor, who is she's finishing up her second term. She's not going to run again. She'd said she'd only run 2 terms. But what she noted was she would get a call from my predecessor, Ken Kelly, and hey, I want to talk to you about this. The CEO of the chamber, hey, I want to talk to you about this. And often they were the same things. And so she just said, well, why don't we just get together for lunch once a month and just talk about whatever the issues that you sort of have. And it became very much of a round table. It wasn't an audience. It was just a round table. And so it's myself, it's the CEO of the chamber, it is the CEO of our destination marketing organization, it's the CEO of our harbor authority, it's one of our major property developers, property owners downtown, it's a couple of city staff, it's the head of our urban development institute for Vancouver Island. And we've been meeting once a month and just able to talk about issues. When COVID hit, and of course, it seems like forever, but that March of 2020, when all of a sudden we were every morning watching the Prime Minister say, "Stay home, everybody stay home," and everything kind of just shut down. It was a very, very eerie time. And for those on the call who were, especially downtowns, it was, tumbleweeds through the streets. So she simply said, okay, let's make these calls every second day. What can the city do? What are you seeing? What can we do? And we would collectively identify issues and then any solutions. And obviously some of them were at provincial and federal levels, but there were lots that we could do locally. So I mean, it was literally every second day. But also we recognized that for the mayor and for many of us representing various types of businesses, the needs were the same. And so we collectively started to advocate as a group. And so, the things that we would send to various ministers, had 7-8 signatures of all the major organizations, nonprofit organizations, arts organizations, business organizations. And we found that, we were lending our voice to lots of other people, but it's certainly, what got us very focused on sort of the needs of businesses and then what we need to ask senior levels of government for. At the city level, it was as simple as, how do we communicate that things are safe downtown, that the city staff are keeping things clean. Our clean team was focusing on disinfecting pay stations and bus stops and just very granular things in those early months that could help in any way, to keep the main street as alive as possible. And we also shared a lot of information from our various networks so that we just really had a good sense, what's office occupancy like this week by card swipe data. Our buildings at 5% or 30%, just a lot of that information so that, again, we could see where some businesses kind of were operating pretty fine and others were down 95%. And then we could be focused on how we help those sectors or those types of businesses. And obviously for those businesses that, sell tourist trinkets to international travelers, they were one of the groups that very clearly just stood out as being absolutely decimated and in need of, not only support, but ongoing support, that as other programs started to wind down, no one was getting off cruise ships or planes. Those businesses needed, particular help. Then when we saw things open up the first summer, a lot of provinces, had their sort of reopening plans, and we started to see issues with staff coming back. Especially frontline service staff who, well, I'm getting $2,000 a month, or I could go back and work full time for $2,400 a month. And so some of those challenges. The reopening this summer was there are no staff, but that partnership has just really meant that we were speaking with one voice on behalf of our members, and that the city, quite frankly, had a very good feel of what was happening on the ground. Whether the council always agreed with what we suggested or not may be a different thing, but it wasn't through a lack of awareness. And that was really the leadership of our mayor, who was just initially just trying to be efficient with her time, but recognized that there was a power in working with these various agencies. And we have continued that also, even independent of that, with respect to some of the support that we have. Obviously, I'm on a number of committees. One of them is for our Harbor Authority, which is dealing with not only the return of crews, but the inevitable community, industry, maybe clashing a bit because of the significant impacts of crews, and helping to work through that so that the cruise industry can be successful, but that we're also mitigating some of the impacts, whether it's transportation congestion in the residential areas, offloading of garbage from Alaska, and some of these other issues to really make sure that the tourism industry is supporting us as much as possible and impacting us as least as possible. And that all came out of the fact that we were meeting so regularly and recognized that there were other areas we could support each other.
Great, Jeff. That's really good. Time is marching on here. Angela, did you want to elaborate on what you put into the chat before we move on? Okay. Kay Matthews is on, as I think most of the people on the call know, is the executive director of the Ontario BIA Association. Kay, you've been commenting on the chat and mentioned that you're going to be doing something on March 22nd. Do you want to say more about that?
Caught me eating my soup.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. You have to slurp it when you can, right?
Right.
So I don't know enough about it. I know that on our best practice call, and we have them weekly every Tuesday at 2 p.m. And have done that since the beginning of COVID. We started twice a week, as you know, Walter, and now we're at once a week. And BIAs come together just to chat amongst each other and offer their solutions and offer their pain points. But there was a very interesting conversation last week from Sudbury, and they've offered and volunteered to come back and talk about their new vacancy program. But Jeff talked about the pop-ups, the ability to have probably shared offices, which is a really good one. And it is hard because, and I would agree with Jeff, as BIAs, we're not mall managers. And neither do we want to be mall managers. Mall managers mean you've got a single ownership of your main street or your downtown, whereas we like to keep that free enterprise. But it's how do we work with that free enterprise system for the benefit of all? So, I noticed some people have tried in this space and haven't had success with it, but many have, and it has been that has helped a lot of communities as well. So, we're all trying different things. I'm looking forward to hearing what's coming out of Sudbury in a couple of weeks. That's about it.
Great. Thanks, Kate, for that. As some of you, again, may know, Ontario BIAs did an impact study several years ago, and we're looking at helping to contribute to that, especially from the visitor economy point of view, and we'll be having some sessions subsequent looking more about impact and data, which we think is something that we heard all the way through. A couple of things that I wanted to make sure that we didn't lose out as we find our way through this webinar. And Case sort of touched on that, is one of the things that we heard is when we asked about recruitment, we always asked about recruitment. Some BIAs said, yes, that's our business, and we're going to work with the local real estate agent and others to make sure that at least we're part of the decision-making process. Others said, that's not our business, it's up to the private sector. And we shouldn't, couldn't, or don't want to be in that. Any thoughts, Jeff, though, about that differing of roles that, and you started off by that, of saying if we do, let's say fair, this you're going to get this. If you intervene, you potentially can look at a more revitalized, energetic Main Street.
Yeah, and I think part of it is and obviously Kay's on here. I'm on the BIA ABC board. So, we have BIAs as big as downtown Vancouver, downtown Victoria. I mean, I have, 17 hotels. I have 1,350 individual businesses. So we simply don't have the physical capacity to be, going down to 123 Elm Street and having a chat with the leasing agent. It's not practical for us. Smaller BIAs that really are that Main Street, that 4-block Main Street, I think do have more capacity to be able to, get to know the leasing agents and sort of say, what's the owner looking for? Boy, we sure could use a fill in the blank here. And so I do think there is a role for BIAs where there's capacity to really kind of just say, boy, we'd sure love to have a whatever type of business, or, we used to have this and it was really successful and we really need another one. That at least informs that leasing agent about kind of, if someone's chatting around, what might be a good fit. Because for the leasing agent, they want to have a successful tenancy. For the owner, they want to have monthly rent. And for the BIA, you want to have a business that's going to add to your main street. So I do think there is a role. It just becomes, the larger the BIA, the more challenging it becomes because there's just not the capacity. Also, I have all the office buildings here. So, I'm not going to get into leasing the fifth floor about whether it's a chart and accountancy firm or a law firm that's moving in there. So, but working with the city on kind of what, that broader vision and what tools might be there is, I think, a role that the BIA can play to have influence if you have a good relationship with your council and your senior staff. So each one's a little bit different. And, Kay, of course, mentioned Sudbury. There's small towns with BIAs, and then there's big cities. And I think there's quite a difference. But I think at the end of the day, my sort of view is, like I look at downtown as one big mall, and kind of our job is to get people into the mall. And the best way to do that is to make sure you've got something to offer as many people as possible that's going to attract them or retain them into your downtown. And so any way that I can work on that, I will. The other thing I'll say is I think there's a real distinction between local ownership and non-local ownership. So, those that own buildings and live in somewhere in the community tend to be more community minded, not because they're better people, but because they simply live here themselves. I think when you have property ownership from outside of your region, there's less of that personal touch. They're just looking to lease the space. It might be part of a large portfolio. Their marching orders to the leasing agent is lease it as fast as you can. So if you know your local owners, I think sometimes you also have just that personal relationship to manage that curation a little bit more.
Great. We're running out of time. Judy Morgan just posted something, a note talking about how to attract retail, the importance of data. We're going to come back to this quite clearly, right, Tom? We're going to have a session in a little while. And so this is really underline the fact that the whole question of data is important, and how to access it and analyze it and use it as you're moving forward. Jeff, when I remember part of our discussion, you talked about walking around your downtown. Now, admittedly, it's bigger than most others that we're dealing with. But what would be the kinds of criteria or factors that you would say, we really need because it would make it a better place? What are the things that you're looking at? Is it vitality? Is it success of retail? What are the kinds of things that, based on your experience, you would say should be an objective of a retail strategy?
Yeah, I think almost always I would start by, what will serve the locals. So what is missing for people who could come downtown in February? Summers are busy. Don't really need to do a lot to get people to come into downtown in the summer. But what's going to get people downtown in February? So it's really focusing on the local. And there's two aspects to that. There is why would I ever come from the suburbs into downtown Victoria in February? So that's often, unique retail. So, retail that you can only find downtown. So one-off shops. We have an excellent mall downtown, and we're fortunate that we have an anchor mall right in the center of our downtown. And they've got a tremendous mix, and they've been doing some really creative leasing. They've got essentially one of their newer tenants is itself a collective for local artisans. And it's been very successful. So we're fortunate that we actually have a successful mall downtown, so people can get the mall experience, but we also have all around that one-off unique retail. The other side is if I have to get in my car or a bus and I live downtown to go somewhere to get a service or a product, I'm probably going to do all of my work that day out somewhere else. So what is it that is missing for me as a resident downtown that will keep me here? And so that's where you start to look at things like childcare spaces. Do we have enough dentists? Do we have those types of services that people have in their neighborhoods, that this is now a neighborhood as well? And then the third is, I think what we discovered during COVID, when a lot of municipalities around Canada, and for that matter, North America, all of a sudden discovered the ability to not have red tape and build patios very quickly on the street, and that Western civilization would not fall in upon itself. That kind of vibrancy and that kind of like people just went, oh, this is kind of cool. And we saw how successful it was because we had very little of that in Victoria. That's the third component, which is it's just kind of cool. I can sit outside and have a beer. Imagine that, and so that's to the vibrancy and vitality aspect, Walter, which is this is a cool place to be. And what we're really pushing the city now, that they've now said, we like this. And so we want to have it as a permanent feature. The first thing they did was struck an internal working group that has nobody from the restaurant sector or the bar sector on it to develop a permit process that will serve the permit process that the city develops. And we're saying, no. Of course, you have to have a permit because it's using public space, but get a few people who actually do the work, do the business as part of that, so that you're developing a permit process that does meet the city's needs, but also actually will work. Otherwise, you'll get a permit process that nobody will apply for because it doesn't work. And so that's the third part, is really working with the municipality on this really cool blend of public-private space that was initially just, we got to react to COVID, reduce capacity, we got to help these businesses. And now it's like, that's actually really cool. So that's the third piece. And so that's in many cases working with existing businesses, but really now creating something new for at least, the BC context, where most of our liquor laws, were written in 1910. We only have 2 liquor licenses, food primary and liquor primary. So it's a very bureaucratic, very rigid system. But if we can work with municipalities, we could end up with a long-lasting legacy of really cool public spaces that blend that private and public in a way that animates really the whole block, or even the whole stretch of blocks, if you have a number of those businesses. And, I think it's St. George Street in St. John, Newfoundland. If they can have a patio in February in St. John, Newfoundland, and people love it, we can certainly do it on the West Coast here.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. What a radical idea, right? Involving the people that actually are doing it as part of the process. Angela, I've noticed a comment that you came up with talking about safe, clean, walkable main streets. That's really important. Hi, Angela. Did you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. I hope, is my mic working?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my comment there is simply that I think with the pandemic here in Bloor West, West Toronto, we've experienced an increase in vandalism, in graffiti and garbage and all kinds of aspects that locals notice. And I think so the BIAs have had to work extremely hard at trying to keep our main streets clean. And I think, and keeping them safe. So the more you have, clean, safe places for people to get out, whether it's seniors, whether it's couples, whether it's kids, the more people want to get out, and the more, that will appeal to the retail sector, who wants to capture that walk by traffic. So I think, I guess my comment is that, that is not just a BIA responsibility, but, the city and organizations need to work together to keep our communities safe, clean, and walkable.
Great. Thanks, Angela.
I'd like to pop in on that, because I think that's a whole session. That might be a half-day session. Now, I can tell you that in BC, it's the number one issue for our BIAs, and there's a whole host of things on that. But I think what it's demonstrated is, again, if you are a BIA or a Main Street where you rely on visitation, whether it's tourism or just people who will have to come into your commercial business district, if they perceive it, it could be the cleanest, safest place. If they perceive it as not being clean and safe, they will not come. And when your commercial business district is charging the highest lease rates in your region, businesses will start to go elsewhere. And again, the only thing you've got that will come in are 7-Elevens and Macs, which themselves aren't great draws for. And I do think, in fact, I would argue that the challenge with BIAs is we've typically done flower pots and clean teams to kind of augment cleaning. We are not equipped to deliver mental health services. We're not delivered, and we have a whole rash of cascading issues, catch and release, completely inadequate mental health and addiction services, a laissez-faire approach. We don't want to criminalize people, so we do nothing. And all of it is cascading, and all of it converges on commercial business districts. And I think in British Columbia, the government is now looking to start building complex care facilities to recognize that a small group of very, very disadvantaged individuals, not because they're bad, but because of their challenges, are hugely disruptive and impactful to the larger community. And I think we need to have a shift in how we choose to help people and recognize that some people are going to need very intensive care, including potentially involuntary care, in order for them to A, not be preyed upon by the criminal element anymore, and B, have a chance to get healthy. Right now, we've invested everything in harm reduction, and we have record overdoses. And we're all scratching our heads going, why is that? The other three pillars that were supposed to be there was prevention, treatment, and enforcement, and we've invested nothing in those. It's supposed to be 4 pillars. If we get back to 4 pillars where we're actually treating people, we're actually preventing people, we can have a huge impact. But that is going to require governments to adopt a different approach. And I've always argued that now the public gets it. When the political arm goes into that arena, they'll find most of the public's already there, with not tough measures, not criminal measures, but the appropriate health measures. So that's, I think, Angela's, we can do everything we want to curate a downtown, but if it's rife with crime and open drug use and everything else, we're fighting an uphill battle. Sorry, Walter, I just wanted to comment on that.
No, that's very useful. We always promise people we'll do this in an hour, and we're up to the hour. But we're quite happy to open this up for a few more minutes, assuming that Jeff is available.
Happy to stay.
Okay, but so I just wanted to note that Kay, you posted that you're working on toolkit. Is that right? I'm reading. Is Kay still with us?
Yeah, we're working on a homelessness toolkit specific for BIAs. The gentleman that's creating it with us is Ian DeYoung, who was a keynote speaker at our conference in September and will be coming back in April as well to basically unfold the toolkit. Because our BIAs, whether they're big cities or small communities, have been dealing with an unbelievable issue across the province of Ontario and beyond, apparently, from the sounds of Jeff. And one of our board members, his brother is the head of what do they call this one? It's too many acronyms in life, but basically, he says one of the reasons why it's on Main Street is because they feel safer there as those who are street influenced, because so many of the people who have homelessness issues, they want to be in a place where they've got light around them, where they can be in a doorway and feel protected. So many are violently treated. and that the main street gives them a certain level of protection that they don't feel in an industrial area or somewhere else. So it makes sense. And I know from the work that we're doing and that our BIAs are doing is that they're doing it incredibly compassionately and with a great deal of empathy. But you're right, Jeff, that's not, what they consider themselves their main work is to do that. But from a lack of, having all of these public health departments working from home, and municipalities working from home, they just means that our BIAs have been the ones that are the feet on the street. They're the ones that have not worked from home. They're still there. They're still seeing what's happening and trying to work with all of the different associations and social agencies to mitigate the effects, both positive and negative.
Well, and this is the challenge, and I know we're going a bit off topic, Walter, but it's so critical in terms of, if you're going to work with property owners to curate a downtown, especially if they aren't local, they're going to go, well, I can't lease it because my prospective tenants have all heard that downtown fill in the blank is dangerous and dirty, and so it is so important. But the other thing is that we have societally, because, and use the word compassions, and we're using words like, street influenced and, experiencing homeless persons with lived experience. And we've got all these nice words. At the end of the day, it's still the 19-year-old college student who's opening up the boutique, who has to clean the feces, the vomit, and we have somehow said that's okay. And we have no compassion for that student who's going, I don't feel safe 5 o'clock at night, locking up with 3 guys smoking crack in my doorway. We somehow don't say, well, geez, that's you shouldn't feel unsafe being at work. And it's because we have so gone this way that we are now not listening to all of the other citizens and the impacts these things have. And I think we're starting. My fear is, and for those on the call, I'm co-chair of the Coalition in Homelessness with the mayor here for Greater Victoria, because my concern is when the pendulum gets too far one way, what does it typically happen? For those physics students, it goes way over the other way. And we end up having a very hard turn reaction that is no better for the individuals we're talking about. And I do think the BIAs and their members are getting exhausted that if they actually raise these issues, they're being made to feel like they're wrong for raising it. That, this is the 5th time this week I've had a B&E. Well, why are you complaining? And so that exhaustion leads to frustration. The frustration leads to, like I say, more significant, and that won't serve anybody. So I do think it's something we need to grapple with. And the other thing that Kay mentioned is this was a big city issue 5 years ago. This is now in every community, and it's the toxic drug supply. And we can say whatever we want, but at the end of the day, it's the toxic drug supply is creating many of the challenges that individuals who are self-medicating or suffer trauma are now taking drugs that themselves are damaging their brains. We know this, medically. And so our approach is not working. It's getting worse. We see what's happened in some of the US cities in their main streets, where it was a hands-off approach. And now those mayors are scrambling and going, oh my gosh, I guess maybe not having any police didn't work very well. And so we have to find that balance. And the key is, what is best for that individual, for them not to be overdosing? And I don't think we're solving that problem yet. We're saying nice words and we're trying to feel better about their circumstance, but at the end of the day, we're not actually helping those individuals. Anyways, I'll off my soapbox, Walter.
That's quite all right. Fergus McLaren is on the call, and Fergus brings up the point that it's more in some cases, but we also have to think about toilets and waste bins and all these other things that don't sound very exciting and sexy. But yet, if we're trying to animate and curate, we need to make sure there's basic needs that are being met on our main streets. But security coming out. It's interesting, one of the BIA people we were talking about wants to think that a BIA might be a community improvement association, because so many of the issues that BIAs are dealing with, as Jeff has so eloquently put forward, are community. They really have, they're not, if you want to, the specific mandate of a BIA, and yet absolutely essential if they're going to be successful and safe places to work.
Well, if I might, Walter, one of the programs we initiated this year, subsequent to our interviews, is what we've called the Good Neighbor Program. And what we have done is we've partnered with the Downtown Residents Association with Victoria Police to create a block watch for businesses. And the goal of the program is to really connect the neighborhoods. So get the businesses really getting to know each other block by block, so that they know the owners, they know the managers, they know each other by name, they share information, and get to know the people that live above them in the condo buildings. And it is about creating one neighborhood, not the business community and not the residential community, but one neighborhood. But the other thing I want to say about curation, and I didn't go in this direction, but given where we're at this conversation, and again, I spent 13 years in social services. I'm on the coalition. I mean, I'm very invested in this. But for the larger downtowns, you can create all the housing, all that you want, if you continue to offer all of the services that you're currently offering: soup kitchens, supervised consumption sites, free dental clinics. You will not see any change on the streetscape. As you house people, you actually have to decentralize the services that you're providing the street community in order to reduce the impacts in your commercial business districts. The services don't follow the needs follow the services. If you put all the services in one area, all the needs will congregate around there. One of the reasons why I agreed to do a second term on the coalition is we will have enough funding from the different levels of government to actually provide choice of housing for everyone that we're currently dealing with. What I've said is, great, we also have to work with some of our partners to suggest it's time for them to close. If we have 12 soup kitchens in downtown Victoria, when we've housed everybody, we're going to have homeless people sleeping in doorways. That's a tough conversation, but that's the conversation. Doesn't mean the services aren't needed, but you decentralize them to reduce the impact in any one particular neighborhood. And if downtown is a neighborhood just because it happens to have retail and food and beverage, you wouldn't put them all in a residential neighborhood. So you shouldn't put them all in a commercial business district just because that's where they've always been. That's a tough conversation. But in terms of curation, if you really want to have that impact where you're still serving people's needs, but you're also serving your tenants and others, decentralizing some of those community services is essential.
Great. Thank you for that, Jeff. Just Angela, you did raise in one of your comments the fact that it's integrated. It may not be the responsibility of the BIA, but it's got to be integrated at a municipal, town, whatever level. That's a topic for another. I noticed that we're losing people, but Jeff, we can continue if you've got a second or two if there are more questions.
Yeah.
But on our behalf, I just wanted to thank you sincerely for taking the time before and dealing with us, for sharing your ideas today. Jeff has done a section that will be available, as Tom said, either later today or in the next couple of days. We'll let you know, that talks about this. So Jeff, we know you're really incredibly busy, and I just wanted to thank you on behalf of Ryerson for doing this, and we look forward to working with you in the future. So thank you very much. I didn't want to stop the conversation, but I didn't want to get to the point where at least we haven't recognized you. Fergus, you want to make
a round of applause? I was just applauding, thanking you for the event.
You were applauding. I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for applauding.
Yeah, and well, Walter, I always applaud when you're speaking, but I just I have one point, and I think I've seen it's been really important for a number of downtowns here and internationally, and this is Wi-Fi access. And that if you really want to bring younger people downtown or younger families, Wi-Fi, if you're able to, obviously it's a cost and it's an expense, but it helps to draw people, and especially with the advent of 5G, I think that this is something that would be helpful for a data gathering standpoint, monitoring standpoint, et cetera. And Walter, you were talking about digital before. And I think that Wi-Fi might be actually serve a number of purposes if you can encourage districts to start ramping that up as a service offering.
Thanks, Fergus.
I think that's I worked for a number of years with Shaw, and one of the things I developed was their approach to having their product Shaw Go Wi-Fi available no charge in public spaces. So their Shaw Open portal. And one of the things, Fergus, that I would always sort of counsel people is one of the frustrations is some Wi-Fi signals are stronger than others. And so depending on where you place your access points, you keep bumping people out of various their Wi-Fi, and it can be a very frustrating experience. So I think municipal Wi-Fi is a very important tool. Just have to be very careful with and use RF engineers to make sure you deploy it in a way that it becomes a positive experience, not a frustration. The first deal I did was with Victoria here many years ago, and that was one of the challenges we had. So I think it's very important. But I also think that absolutely data, I mean, that's a whole other issue. We do an annual report and we ask in a confidential way a whole bunch of business questions about business performance among our members as a way of really getting a good feel about what's happening on the street, how their business is performing, and what are the issues they've identified that either impacted positively or negatively. But we still lack, outside of the census, really good data about what's happening. And unlike chambers and others who are membership based, I have to join you. BIAs are geographically based. So we have pedestrian counters throughout downtown. So we own that data. We can collect data for the entire area. And so ways that we can get new and better data points, I think, are critical. And ultimately, we're in a position to then help leasing agents by we can actually give them footfall counts and seasonal counts and various other things. And I know that back in 2013, 8 downtowns actually did an analysis to be able to measure in their commercial business districts jobs per square kilometer. And I think there are a number of other really important data points that we could start to make use of, which helps everything, including the curation of a downtown. So that is a whole other session. Boy, there's lots of sessions.
Yeah. We don't want to lose this data thing, Jeff, and so we are going to be dealing with it in a subsequent session. And if you've got any suggestions, you might send them to Tom or myself so we can start to collect these, and then we'll share that and hopefully build on it. But you're absolutely right, Jeff, that this is the consistent thing that we've been hearing, is we don't have the data to talk to our council, to talk to our own members, to determine what's best for our Main Street. And so we're very cognizant of that and want to work with Kay here in Ontario, but others, to see if academically, from a research point of view, we can help that dialogue to get it going. And we're talking to other groups that are saying, we can't make the case for the murals and art that we're doing. We just don't have data to argue if are they effective and are they working. So it's part of a much bigger discussion that we don't want to lose, and I'd like to come back to you, Jeff, at that point. We will note everything that that you've shared with us, and we'll make sure that's part of the record. Jeff, is the retail strategy that you were discussing earlier, are the terms of reference for that publicly available?
No, and I think like I say, they did it. They selected some neighborhoods that had small commercial streets as part of them. They have not done it for the sort of downtown. And I think they realize because it's significantly different, because you are serving 3 different constituencies. A neighborhood commercial district is the people who live there. But downtowns are visitors, workers, and residents. And so, no, it is not there. I've been pushing the city to, get the consultant back and let's move on with it. But again, COVID's done lots of interruptions and there's always competing interests. I think it's a vital thing for us. This is a a great time for a city like Victoria to do it, with a bunch of new stuff that's on the books but not yet here, to actually, more detail or with more finesse, curate all the additional stuff that's going to come online, rather than just, kind of go, well, there's 30,000 square feet. Let's see what's in there. Right.
Yeah.
So I do think it's important. We're in British Columbia. Our municipalities are all have their elections on the same day. That's October for this year. So for anyone who's involved in politics, that we're entering silly season, which makes it more challenging to get councils to focus. But Walter and Tom, if and when they get that particular contract let, I'd be happy to share it with you.
I have Jeff, that we don't have any silly season here in Ontario. And if you believe that.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, that's news to me. But no.
Okay, I think what we'll do now, because we're nearing the end and we're going to lose our time here, is, again, thank you, Jeff. But I'd like to thank everyone that was part of today. It's the best discussion we've had, for sure. It's raised all kinds of other issues that we're going to document, and we'll be sharing these with you. So thank you, everyone, for participating, sticking with us. Thank you, Jeff, and thanks, Tom, for always getting everything together. So thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Cheers.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay.
Have a great week, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.